Good morning. It's just after midnight on June 17th, 2021. I am making this video and doing something I've never done before. I want to give a direct response to or initial reaction to what I just watched, which was a recording with transcription of a press conference that Vladimir Putin gave today, or rather yesterday, on June 16, 2021, in Geneva. I've never actually watched a press conference or an interview with Vladimir Putin. I've only read through transcripts of, I believe, two of his talks, two of his verbal presentations, and I read an editorial that he wrote in a publication on the anniversary of VE Day that was controversial. Why would I watch this if I haven't before? Well, I was listening to the news. It was on Fox News, actually, and they were responding to what Putin said. There were three presenters, and right after those three presenters, former President Donald Trump came on air and began to give his own response at events that are occurring at this time. And I said, you know what? I'm going to compare what they're discussing about what is supposedly the intent or what's going on with what Putin's being acknowledged as having discussed in Geneva. And I'm going to watch it myself. I'm going to find the transcript and review it myself and see if their characterization is accurate. Let me tell you, it is not at all accurate. Now, I'm watching it, I watched it, and there was simulcast translation in English as well as a transcript. There was a written transcript that was provided by a service that apparently does transcription. So there may be some error in terms of the translation, the quality of the translation, and the matching of the transcript also had a few areas that didn't quite correlate 100% with what was the real time interpreting services into English. But I do not believe that the representations in the American media right now of either the content or the intent of what was presented in that press conference is accurate. And not only that, seeing as how, especially this is the first time I've witnessed or watched a formal presentation to media that included American media at an event such as this. I think there is a very serious gulf in communication with people in the United States about very important issues and manners of perspective in identifying the needs both of the United States and in Russia. And if we don't address this directly now, especially insofar as, again, there is this consideration of the New START treaty, then I will let you know now I have no intention of investing in either Russia or America for 5 more years of the status quo that refuses to get to the point. There were a number of things substantively about this press conference that were incredibly disturbing. Among the things are the manner in which members of the media were represented. I used to be a journalist. I used to be a newspaper editor. I do not recognize what I saw as professional decorum by members of the media. Now, I'm not allowed to be acknowledged these days as a member of the media, but what I saw is actually connected to a form of automation that has been circulating in Texas for the last 3 years. It's almost that deliberate and that precise, including with the ascribement and timing and placement of particular archetypes, and even the sequence of specific publications as well as topics is completely formulaic. Perhaps there was some predetermination and there was a fielding of questions beforehand and there was a specific selection that had been assigned as part of a sequence in terms of questions that had been considered and approved, so that was allowed to be considered beforehand. This happens. But in the context of the other manners that were communicated, this is more than just an analytics consideration or a calibration of that press conference as a major transactional event in consideration of a variety of analytical data, including analytical data that, if you actually review the transcript and the presentation, has a very specific metric scheme associated with it. I'm not going to say much more about that. But what I want to talk about is something that I've suspected for a long time that I believe was confirmed during that press conference, which is my concern that the United States and Russia specifically, but perhaps other countries as well, have a very different understanding of medical diagnostics. I'm not just talking about the actual code that a medical provider presents in the documentation following their assessment that is used for billing and is also used for treatment. I'm talking about consideration of what's understood to be causal factors associated with a medical ailment based upon an understanding of the body and the environment, including the saturation of various kinds of technology in the environment. And I have suspected or understood for a while that a very significant situation that has been ongoing globally, but especially in the relationship between the United States and the countries of the former Soviet Union, specifically Russia, is that we in the United States have a different approach to how we view what would be identified as the medical sector or things that could be otherwise identified within a medical modality that other countries, including Russia, see in some other capacity. And that as part of the decommissioning of the Soviet Union, the United States took a specific stance on specific aspects of the Soviet society that were not characterized the same in the United States when it came to the same kind of application. Specifically, the things that may be connected, for instance, to the discussions that were going on during the 90s and up through the early 2000s regarding scientists from the former Soviet Union that had been trained in their biological weapons program. And that the characterization of what a biological weapon is and what it meant to be a scientist involved in the biological weapons program was perceived differently and projected differently within the United States medical industry. And that also related to the economy, specifically the digital economy, and specifically an understanding of the human body as a potential organic interface in regards to technologies that end up occurring and that end up transmitting with what we have been trained to intermediate with a non-organic interface, such as a computer or cell phone or tablet. And so what could be considered cybernetics is something that has been around for several decades, but we have not in the United States approached it from that kind of perspective. And instead, we have identified certain kinds of engagements with various kinds of technology, as well as disturbances in the environment, as being about a medical problem or a medical condition or a illness, as opposed to some other manner, including bioengineering, and or seeing those kinds of accommodations in the consideration of another kind of functionality in society. I actually believe that what was articulated in that press conference may have some gleanings of the disinvestment, or shall we say underinvestment, in the appropriate lexicon for actually being able to create a real capacity to create a mutual relationship with Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union. I watched for several years including directly for several months, while I worked in a public health department. The manner of addressing factors related to allegations of Medicare fraud as they intersected with the medical sector specific to devices that one would need in order to assist them with mobility issues, mobility assistance devices, and allegations of fraud. And my concern that was burgeoning at the time and that has been meted out over time that medical treatment in the United States is not just about responding to sickness and illness. Medical treatment is also about the economy and not just about medical insurance cost, not just about cost of treatment, but also about the kind of economic variables and economic events that occur in connection with the diagnosis and the later treatment, as well as the billing and what ends up happening with the assessments provided by those that are practitioners. And that a major focus in the last several decades has been about supporting or trying to promote this economy, but doing it in a manner that emphasizes too significantly its derivative applications in an attempt to motivate or stimulate us into engaging through the derivative expressions and trying to allow or leave the specifics of the derivative aspects or the derivations from which the derivatives come to so-called specialists. And we have had a very significant gulf in terms of being able to appropriately communicate different perspectives on our body and technology, specifically because of treatment of so-called medical conditions without going through the full system concepts and the full system implications. It's been understood for a long time, for instance, that other medical modalities or other wellness modalities see human illness in a systemic approach. It doesn't just focus on a specific ailment or a specific organ, that even within the internal body there are systems. And in order to address an ailment with a particular aspect of the system, the entire system has to be recalibrated. This is something that has been a part of so-called medicine for a very long time. But as we start to engage more and more with technology, including in the digital economy and the manners in which our bodies are biologically enhanced to be able to engage with the digital economy, there needs to be more explication and there needs to be a more direct acknowledgement and recognition of what we're actually dealing with. And if that means we have to disengage from or we have to reduce our intended dependency, or rather our intended focus on the primacy of the particular kind of medical treatment model or medical sector as a force in addressing wellness issues, then that's what we're going to have to do anyway. We cannot sustain a process whereby we construct not only physiologically, but also psychologically a constant process of encoding ourselves to be sick or to have a problem. Because as was evidenced in that press conference, that mentality invades and pervades the social functioning and the political functioning, which has a very real material economic functioning. And so we end up taking the sort of polarity where we chastise somebody for their shortcomings, and yet we still have a business need that in comparison makes us look better based upon how significantly we can downgrade, degrade, or demonize them. And then we work the leverage. And in the course of working the leverage, well, if we get hurt, or if we deteriorate, or if we degenerate, we've got doctors and we've got mandated health care. That hasn't been very successful. One of the things that was mentioned that I think is very important and that needs to be addressed immediately from a realistic perspective is how unconstitutional the recent executive order by President Joseph Biden is. Unfortunately, because of what was presented during this press conference, I believe that what it reveals is a potential for exploitation, were the model of catastrophization to be met on equal terms. If what we're seeking is a partnership of exploitation, unfortunately, a lack of appropriate checks applied internally has created significant possibility for such exploitation in a very comprehensive manner. I don't want to see a certain presentation of information from the perspective of understanding it as a threat. I don't have any reason right now to feel threatened. The initial introduction has exposed me to another manner of evaluation that actually answers a lot of questions that up until now had been outstanding. There was specific reference to the fact that the United States had informed Russia that it understood Russia was responsible for hacks involving very key sectors in very substantial matters within the United States. I've recounted elsewhere, and I have evidence that there is a more complex story that is actually connected to the truthful, or rather authentic, causal factors associated with those alleged hacks. But what was also mentioned in this press conference, if it's accurate, is that Russia had informed the United States that it had also been subjected to cyber attacks that had originated from the United States. And that among those cyber attacks that had originated from the United States, there was a very real impact in a specific area of Russia, specifically concerning hacks to its healthcare system. I don't take that lightly. This is what we in the United States had a need to focus on ourselves for our own self-interest for at least 10 years. Going on 12 years, right? Going on over 11 years at least. And to have it presented in the manner it was, in the sequence it was, especially with the other references and in the context of identifying what others may see as a exemplar of a kind of Russia we would like to see ourselves projected as, and having that presented by people that would consider that exemplar to be a colleague, I think makes it even more incumbent upon us to respond with appropriate decorum. If I was in a prison after having to leave the country because my government had exposed me to a potentially fatal chemical weapons attack, I would hope that my colleagues around the world would take seriously the full profundity of my situation. If I needed to take risks in order to appropriately communicate the potential hazards associated with a less than completely forthcoming expose, then I hope that my colleagues would be sophisticated enough to understand those implications as well. Now, I'm not the person of concern in these regards, but I have a personal interest in seeing that both the critic and the one who is being criticized are as accurately recounted and accurately reflected as possible. These are very important matters at this point in time, and what could otherwise be considered an aspersion on a form of cultural appropriation that is also incredibly racist and incredibly degrading may not be that. It may be something else, and in our efforts and our maturation, we'll be able to come to a more sophisticated understanding of how to engage appropriately. At least that's what my hope is. So, if nothing else, I want to say that I'm thankful, I am grateful. I have overcome my fear. I have overcome my fear that by taking people in other countries seriously, including people who are sanctioned, including people who are chastised, that I might actually get some truth regarding the justification for such severe treatment. You have to be able to take a hit to give a hit, right? It would seem that is the truth.